Hello, and welcome to another Profiles of Endurance. I'm Father Scott Vanderveer. The scene of George Floyd, an unarmed black man, being killed by a white police officer in Minneapolis last month has shaken our country to its core and left all of us asking why we are still gripped by America's original sin of racism, even in 2020. More than 50 years after the civil rights movement led by Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. It is clear that all of us must take a role in purging our society of this evil, and all of us are struggling to figure out what our particular role might be in that. Today I'm speaking with Joan Lipscomb Arthurton. Joan is a teacher in the South Colony School District. She's been teaching for 20 years, and most of her career has been spent in that district. For the past several years, she's been working at the Capital District Youth Detention Facility and working with some of the young people who've gotten themselves in big trouble and trying to help them turn things around before it's too late. She is a woman of color who was raised in Ravena, the home of St. Patrick's Church, where I'm a pastor. The Lipscombs were the only black family at St. Patrick's Parish as she was growing up. And she explains how they felt very connected with the rest of the Ravena community, and that her family filled her life with love and acceptance and gave her a great foundation on which to build, a bedrock of confidence that she draws on to this day. But as a black woman in America in 2020, she has some thoughts that are really important for us to hear about what our role might be in making the message that Black lives matter a core part of our personal identity, and how we can build more and more unity and cooperation among all the races until the day comes that we recognize our role as members of God's one holy family. So Joan Lipscomb Arthurton is with us now. And Joan, let's start at the beginning. Talk to us about your family and your community growing up.
So, growing up for me in Ravena was a wonderful experience. My parents gave my brothers and I think, just a wonderful childhood and a wonderful family experience, and just full of love. And when I think back on it, I was loved. I was loved by my parents. I was loved by my extended family. I was loved by our friends. And I felt very protected. I felt like we had everything we wanted and needed. It was just, my memory takes me back, and, if I could go back to my childhood, I would, because it was fantastic.
What a nice thing to be able to say. So many people had traumas in their childhood that make them want to, almost forget. And your childhood is such a happy memory in your life.
It is. And Ravena, Clemens, they were small communities. We knew everyone. Everyone knew us. Church was a big part of growing up. I didn't go to school in Ravena, but I had many friends who went to school in Ravena and because of church and sacraments and all of that, sports, being on the swim team in Ravena. It was just great. It was great.
So you wound up going to the church where I'm now the pastor, Church of St. Patrick. Your family was very involved. Your mother continues to be very involved today, well into her 80s there. And the community is diverse in some ways for a small town, but in other ways it's not. And so you were one of the non-white families in town. And I'm not sure how many other non-white families there were. When you look back at our town and you look back at where you went to school, which was actually in Albany, how often were you getting to spend time with other people who were not white? What would you say if you were to guess a percentage of the community and then the school that you went to? How much of that population was non-white?
Well, for my school, there were about maybe 240, 250 girls, and if 10% of that population was non-white, that's a lot.
Mm-hmm.
We were the only black family at St. And when I spent time with other blacks, it was my family.
Yeah.
It was my family. There's a black church in Queens, Riverview Baptist Church, where I would go with my grandmother occasionally on a Sunday. That's actually the church my mother was born and raised in. She's a convert to Catholicism, but we spent most of our time with we were surrounded by white people. All of our friends were white.
Did that present a bit of a challenge for your parents in helping you to understand relationships and roles? How did they chat with you about race? What kind of messages were they offering you about what race means?
We didn't talk about race. It was like there was nothing to talk about. Our friends were white, and it really didn't matter. There was no dividing line. It was just, we're going over to so-and-so's house, or so-and-so's coming over to our house, or, you're going to school here, and it wasn't even about, when I think about our parents sending us out of Ravena, it wasn't because they thought Ravena was a lesser school system. It was that my parents always wanted us to have the best. Yeah. And the best was to go to the schools in Albany. Not because the students in Albany were any better, not because of any other reason, but that's where, they wanted us to go to the best schools, to have the best opportunity for life after.
Yeah.
But we didn't talk about race. It was never an issue.
How about when you got into being more social around teenage years? Something shifts in most people's lives when they become adolescents and they start caring an awful lot about their peer group, and their family recedes sometimes a little bit during those years. How did your peer group communicate about race to you growing up?
It didn't matter. It did not matter at all, because we didn't define ourselves that way. You were in high school, we were in a peer group because you played sports, or you were in a peer group because you were in drama club, or you were in a peer group because you lived, in the same few blocks as and other girls or whatever. I was very confident. And I still am.
Yes.
I was very confident. My parents gave me that, especially my dad, and I was fearless. Nothing ruffled me, and I didn't look for it. I didn't look for a reason to feel, outcast or unduly treated or disrespected or anything. So even in high school, it was not even an issue. We just all came together. We just all came together.
It's impressive.
Yeah, I was never made to feel less than because of the color of my skin.
When was the first time that it wasn't so simple in your life? What stage of life were you in when you experienced something that didn't follow that pattern?
if it was like, I can't even say it was college, where different things happen in our lives, different experiences. You're away from home, you're by yourself in the big city or whatever. I probably didn't really, I feel like perhaps it should have happened sooner, or it might have happened sooner, but I just haven't had many experiences that I can say were, based on, I was mistreated because of race.
Yeah.
I've dated, outside of my race, and, you might get a look here or there, but there was never anything like, blatant. And it, I certainly wasn't the first person, to date, a white guy. So it wasn't like, people seeing me and someone else was the first time they had seen that, you know? I did have a bad experience, or an unfortunate experience, a few years ago when I was shopping. My husband and I, he wasn't my husband at the time, but, we were in a store, and we went in and we were looking around, and, somebody's working at the front desk, and okay, they're on the phone, but eventually they're going to come over and ask you how you're doing and can they help you, and that never happened. And there was no one else in the store, and we were, at first I was kind of like, okay, this isn't really happening right now, but it did. And so no one ever came over, and we were just kind of looking around. It was it was a women's store. And so we waited a little while, and nothing happened. Nobody, really spoke to us. So we left. And, Frank and I were like, wait, that didn't just happen, did it?
Wow.
Really? Did that just happen? So I took the next step, and I called, the head store. And I spoke to a woman on the phone, and she was apparently appalled on the other end, and she said, oh my God, we just had training for that. I can't believe that just happened. I'm going to get to the bottom of this, blah, blah, blah. And I never heard any more. I never heard from her again. I thought she'd, call me and at least say, I took care of it. You're more than welcome to go back. We'll give you a $10 coupon. But none of that ever happened. And so I haven't been in that store since. But I haven't had an experience like that before either. So, or since, I should say.
Yeah.
But that's probably when it's been the most blatant to me.
Sure.
I haven't experienced anything like that since, either, towards me or Frank. I haven't seen anything like that since.
Does the fact that you personally have not experienced some of the things that we hear about in the news, or that other members of the Black community have talked about, does that change the way you respond to what is happening in the news right now? How do you, when you look at the current situation with the strife in our society and the terrible sadness over George Floyd's death at the hands of police, and the resulting protests and the Black Lives Matter movement, what are your thoughts as someone who is a member of the Black community but doesn't necessarily share all of the same experiences of mistreatment that we hear are common for many others?
Well, it doesn't. It doesn't change it for me. I'm a Black person, and when something like what happened to George Floyd happens, that it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you've never had an experience like that or not. it doesn't change it, because that could happen. That could have been, just like everyone said, that I was thinking of my son. I've got a husband. I just hope every night my husband comes home and I don't get a call. I've got 3 brothers. I've got nephews. I've got cousins. I've got an uncle. And it doesn't matter whether it's a family member or not. When something like that happens to every black person, anybody who knows and loves black people. It doesn't matter, and that's just humanity. That's just it doesn't even matter if you're black. To some degree, that's just inhumane. What happened to George? But no, I don't exclude myself from that just because I haven't had a lot of experiences. Because that was based on race. That was based on hate. Yeah. That was hate. And it, whether it comes out, that those two had a history, George and that officer, but that's hate. And that touches everyone.
Absolutely.
That touches everyone.
One of the things I shared in a recent YouTube video that I produced in response to what's going on right now is I shared that I, as a priest and raised in a Catholic family that had really strong values, that even though I consider myself a bit removed from this struggle because I don't have firsthand experiences of racist interactions, I've realized as I've looked back over my life in reflecting on what this crisis in our country has caused us to consider, I've thought back to some of those moments of racism that I kind of covered over in my life. Things like hearing an uncle of mine who was a police officer talk. He didn't know anyone was in the room, but there was a news story about an alleged crime involving a person of color, and he grumbled the N-word under his breath, and I heard it. And so I would have said, without examining that situation more closely, I wasn't raised with racism because I wasn't taught that was okay, but I was taught the confusing message that someone I loved had, at least in secret, some of that bubbling in him. And I was sharing that my grandmother, who I loved very much, often would she would lock her doors in certain neighborhoods and say to us, "Lock your doors." And she didn't tell us why, but when I looked around, I could see that the people that in those neighborhoods had different colored skin. I talked about the fact that even in my time as a priest, there had been an accusation of a man in the parish while doing a parish duty saying some racistly intolerant things in mixed company. And so I guess that has caused me to recognize, oh my gosh, this has been going on around me, and I treated it as isolated incidents, and I treated it as if it was not happening in my life, but it has come to my shore, and I am affected by the fact that people, close to me have engaged in this way. So I guess it makes me feel, one of the reasons why I think this conversation is important is I see myself as a white person often as a bystander in this issue. And as a bystander, I feel often like, well, I don't know what I can do, because it would be silly for me to speak for the black community about this. I mean, I don't think I have any status as a spokesperson. And as a human being, I always want to stand up for what's right. But I found myself feeling a little bit powerless or removed. And I think that what I'm seeing now, especially after the Aubrey murder jogging.
Yes.
Just that also is completely chilling and causes me to now understand why families are speaking up and saying a lot of parents of black young men say don't ever run in public. It's not safe. So I guess I'm finding myself realizing I am not able to be a bystander because this will not change on its own. It's not going to go down easily. What are your thoughts about that? What would you say to a person who feels, as the way I've described, like they're a bystander and they don't know what to do?
Well, honestly, I feel like I'm a bystander because I have the sense that, here I am in Little Albany, and at least where I live here, there's nothing amiss here. And I feel like now, after seeing the aftermath of George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery, that if we remain silent, whether you're black or white or whatever color you are, that just perpetuates the problem.
Yes.
It's like you're in the grocery store, the sauce is in aisle 4 all over, and you just walk by it and don't report it so that it can get cleaned up. So it has to start, that's where the silence has to end. Whether if you're in the company of people and they're saying something racist, whether it's against blacks or Asians or whatever, if you sit there, even if you don't agree with it or whatever, you've got to say something because it might not stop. They'll leave that party and they'll go on to the next place and they'll say it again. But at least you've spoken up to let people know I don't agree with it, and you've put the other people on notice.
Yes.
You put the other people on notice, like, you know what, that's not right. That's not acceptable, and I don't accept that. And I wrestle with, as a black person, as a black woman who's I'm past those childhood days, as to whether I'm black enough. Because I haven't marched, I haven't protested, I haven't, held up a sign or driven around with anything on my windows or anything like that. I haven't caused a stir. I haven't written a letter or anything. So, and I think now, when you look at what our country is going through with coronavirus and, if we can just get past this, if we can just return to normalcy is the battle cry.
Yes.
But you can't return to normalcy. Normalcy is why we are where we are.
Yes.
When the fears and coronavirus is over, hopefully, and there's a vaccine, and we're not running around with masks on and standing 6 feet apart and all this stuff. It's like we've got to reinvent ourselves.
Yes.
We've got to reinvent ourselves. Otherwise, something else is going to come, whether it's health related or like societal, and this place is going to go up in smoke.
It feels like we are learning for the first time that this American experiment is fragile.
Yeah.
It could all go up in smoke if we don't protect it and treat it right.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I think, things have to start, there's so many arenas in which, something can take hold. You think of, pro athletes, they're so, their message is so powerful, and we live and die on our athletes. Entertainers, um, so many people who can, sort of ignite the fight. But, I can't get to LeBron James. I can't get to, Matthew McConaughey. I'm just thinking of actors. It's got to start right here. It's got to start right here, and then it's got to grow. It's got to grow, and people have to, myself included. If you're not sure what people are dealing with in a community, well then, educate yourself, or go to a common council meeting, or find a forum, or if you have any little tinge of, gee, I might be racist or whatever, find a service of an ethnicity that you're not familiar with, and go on a Sunday. Go on a Sunday and see what it's like. Or the next time you hear about, there's going to be a meeting about such and such, or people are gathering, and there's so many ways to find out all of that. You can't say you didn't know about it, because there's all these outlets to find out that stuff. Or the next time you're in the grocery store and you see a black person, why don't you look at them and smile?
Yeah.
Or hold the door, or whatever the case might be.
Yeah.
There's a whole right now on Netflix. They've got a whole library of movies and documentaries related to the Black experience, and it's entitled Black Lives Matter, and it's like a whole library of movies. And I've seen many of them, but many of them I haven't, and I'm trying to start to watch them. Many of them are excellent. They're excellent. Either the documentary or the movie itself, and it runs. The movies run the gamut from comedy to drama to very serious themes. But it's excellent. It's excellent. So if you get a chance, start to knock those movies down.
And you said it's Netflix, and you can search under Black Lives Matter.
Yeah, search under Black Lives Matter. They've got a whole library of movies, and like I said, documentaries. They've got the one on the Central Park 5, When They See Us. There's a series on Madam C.J. Walker and how she built her cosmetics business. It's really, it's great.
Awesome. I will check that out. And I realize for a lot of people that's a first step. That's just doing your homework. Doing your homework. And it doesn't cost any. Well, if you have a Netflix subscription, it doesn't cost anything. And it is, so many of us already have that. But also, I think it feels like some of the other things that we need to do are a little harder, perhaps. And so it's good to start with something a little bit easier. And the reason I bring up a little harder is this. I'll never forget hearing Maya Angelou, the poet and professor and author, just an American treasure. She was interviewed once and was asked, of the virtues, which is the most important to have? And she said, courage is the most important virtue. And she said, the reason it's most important is that without courage, you cannot practice the other virtues consistently. You'll always be erratic with them. And she used an example. She said, if someone you might say, I do not believe in being racist. I don't approve of racism. I don't approve of judging people by the color of their skin. Great. She said, but then, what are you going to do if you're in the break room and someone who's kind of the popular person at work says, oh, well, that guy, or you know how they are, whatever the race, whatever the ethnicity is that they're doing that with. She said, if you have courage, then you will be able, even in that moment, even though you didn't see it coming, to say the right thing. She
Right.
said, without courage, even if you know the right thing to say, you won't be able to do it in a situation where you're afraid. Or if your boss says it, now here's somebody with role power over you.
Right.
I guess so. My question is for myself, and then I'll ask it of you too. I wonder how I can gather the courage I need to be ready, so that if someone says something about these people, and I'm not gonna name any of these groups, but these are some of the things you hear. Those people are terrible drivers, or these people are bad with money, or the people, that neighborhood is not good because of the people who live there.
Mm-hmm.
How will I be ready, whatever it is, to say the right thing, to say what's right without counting the cost? How can I have courage? And so this is a hard question, but I guess I ask you, what would you, as a woman of color, like for a bystander, someone like me, to say if someone is going toward the line of racism and they're trying to make it acceptable? They're making a joke. They're just, they're having a drink and they're saying something. It starts off funny. And whether it's Native Americans or Asians or blacks or whomever, they start going there. What would you say? And this is a very personal question. I don't pretend that there's a manual that has an answer. What would you like to hear out of the mouth of a good person of faith who doesn't wish to be racist, but consider themselves a bystander and maybe doesn't always have the courage or the words to know what to do? What do you think is a good starting point for doing the right? What's the next right thing to do there?
Well, I agree with the courage, and that's not always easy, especially if you're, say, the only person on that other side, if you're there by yourself. But that's what it takes. It takes one person to take that stand. To put yourself in someone in that other person's shoes.
Mm-hmm.
And understand, or try to understand, what it's like for that person. Like, I have to step back and say, what must it be like? Because even though I'm black, I don't have the same experience that my husband has. I don't have the same experience that my brothers had, or perhaps that, my father had. So you have to think about that, and then say, well, what would would I want someone to stand up for me?
Yeah.
If the shoe was on the other foot, and I'm saying this to you now, and I have to double down and do this myself.
Yeah.
But these are the things we have to do if things are going to have any chance of changing.
Yes.
Because that person who's talking like that has talked like that a million times before.
Yes.
And he or she is most likely a bully.
Yeah.
So, are you going to stand up to the bully? What's the worst that's going to happen? What's the worst that's going to happen? He or she is going to look at you like, what are you talking about? Or maybe you'll be the one to set that person down.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It does. It takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of courage to do any type of, public outcry, protest, rally, all of that takes courage. And it takes courage to stand up to a bully.
You know, it's great that you said bully, because one of the things, you're a teacher by profession, and I'm a former teacher from my life before I was a priest. And I know that a big topic in our schools today is bullying. Bullying is a big thing that we talk about, and bullying can cover, you know, a wide array of behavior. But one of the things that I've learned from the training I went through in an anti-bullying curriculum that was brought to my school when I was teaching at St. Pius Catholic School in the Albany area over 10 years ago, was that it's very hard to affect the behavior of a bully. Bullies often have some kind of predisposition to that makes it hard to reform them. And those who are directly affected by bullies are often overwhelmed by the trauma of the experience. It's hard to strengthen them for the next encounter. The real group you have to work with is the bystanders. Because if when the bully strikes, if the 95% of the people that are standing there that have nothing to do with it say, oh no you don't, they have a lot of power. They're the sleeping giant. So I'm struck that as you say this, it's important for those of us who call ourselves bystanders in the race issues that we face to recognize we're the sleeping giant. We're the one who can tell the bully, no, not on our watch. I won't stand here and have someone say that. Not when our country's being torn apart at the seams by this very sentiment.
Right. And that's why, you know, it's just wonderful that, you know, so many people mobilized and were out there.
Yes.
Many whites, many white people of all different backgrounds have been out, you know, marching and protesting for something better. Yeah.
Yes.
For the brutality to stop, you know, for justice.
Absolutely.
Yep, it's not just, you know, we're tired of, you know, the coronavirus has exhausted us all.
Yes.
But good people who want, you know, equality, people who want justice, people who want fairness, you know, everybody's just exhausted.
Yes.
It's exhausted, and that's what you saw. That's what you've seen, you know, and it's interesting that it's, you know, it's hot, and, you know, that just seems to amplify everything, you know, when it's hot, you know, when it's hot out, and, you know, people are sweating and they're hot, you know, and then you got a pandemic and people are wearing masks, and, you know, don't get too close because you're going to spread the virus, and then the virus is going to keep going, but it is what it is, you know?
Amen. Yeah. I think your name, and I think that also, it does explain we're in a bit of a perfect storm right now, where you've got economic trouble as a result of a virus which threatens us all. And then, of course, you've got this systemic problem, which I think part of what's shocking about this is there were some really good years there where it felt maybe like we were becoming a post-racial society, or some of us, from our perspective, thought we might be, you know, and it felt comfortable, and it felt like maybe we've gotten past that. And it felt almost like we might have been able to say, oh, the civil rights movement is complete now. You know, the work is complete. And what we have seen is, no, it's not. It is not. And that's why nobody gets to be really a bystander, even if we feel like we are, because the work is not done. And we cannot hand our children a society that hasn't made progress on this.
No, and when President Obama was in office, you know, I think a lot of black people, a lot of people felt like, oh my God, you know, he's calmed the waters. But no black person probably thought, you know, oh, we've made it. You know, yeah, it was great. It was wonderful. It was awesome.
Yeah.
You know, 4 years and then another 4 years. But what I lament for him is his legacy. You know, and not, you know, I think he was great and, you know, first black president and, you know, all of that. But, you know, when you pass that torch on, you hope that it's going to someone who is acting in, you know, just following, at least with some dignity, at least with some, you know, modicum of what you did and how you presided over the nation. And you know, we know that's not the case, but yeah, it was calm for that time, and of course, everyone in the country wasn't happy that, you know, we had a black man at the helm, but he brought, you know, calm and some sensibility to things that, you know, our country is lacking and in need of now.
And I think it's important for people listening who may be, it's something I think that's really important to name, that there are people who did not like the administration of President Obama for political ideology reasons. They're, you know, committed Republicans who, but I think no matter your political persuasion, it's fair to say that President Obama represented, his presidency 50 years after the Civil Rights Movement represented something more than his personality or his political ideology. To have a black, and I think it was noteworthy as a nation that we, and I think some people took note of this, we elected a black president before we elected a female president of any race. You know, that's not unnoted either, that we, you know, that's something that hasn't occurred yet. And so I think it is interesting. And I think anybody who's listening who says, you know, are you trying to persuade us to espouse democratic principles? I don't think that's the topic of this. You know, the topic is he represented a progress that we made and a way of, he carried the office with a dignity that I think made a lot of people feel connected to his presidency because of what it represented for our society.
Right. And I think, so, you know, you've got a black president and black people are proud and, you know, their chests are out and, you know, life is great. You know, I got somebody in there who looks like me, talks like me, dances like me, everything. You know, when he and Mrs. Obama would have those specials on with like people singing at the White House. Like, did you see those? Those were awesome.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
That was awesome. But I think what happened too in our last election was you had a lot of black people saying, "Oh, well, our guy's out of there, so I'm not going to vote." You know, my guy's out. Why am I going to go vote? You know, and you can't have that mentality. You know, it's like, no, we gotta mobilize. Everybody's got to vote because otherwise, you know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
You know what's going to happen if everybody doesn't get out there and vote.
Right.
So.
Because we have to be honest about the fact that what's been unmasked in our society is there will always be people who don't like a Democratic presidential candidate for no matter who that person is, because their issue is not based on race. It's based on ideology. But we are now learning that some of the people who say Barack Obama was a terrible president are saying that because of race.
Right. Sure.
And I think that's something that we would have liked to have not seen.
Right.
I know I would have liked to have not had to see that. I would have liked to have been able to say, no, I'm sure we're beyond that. And it's painful. Yeah. And of course now to say that right now in 2020 feels foolish, but I have to own that foolishness. I really thought we were in a different place than we were.
Mhm.
And which brings up the fact that one of the leaders who created the vision for America that I think a lot of us were raised knowing was the goal was Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who taught, that famous I Have a Dream speech. In many parts of our country, kids memorize it. I've never memorized it, but I know so much of it. Let freedom ring. I know this speech so well. Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics that will join together in that great spiritual free at last, thank God Almighty we're free at last. And I get goosebumps saying it. You're a teacher, and so you've shared that vision with your students. On top of that, you've been the chair of a committee that gives scholarships to students and coordinates an annual celebration for the birthday of Dr. King. What does his message, what does his life and his movement mean to you now in 2020?
Well, I think that civil disobedience could be a catalyst for change. You can't sit and wait around forever. I could say patience, but I think what we've seen in the last few weeks is that, you can't wait. What are we waiting for? Things have to happen now, and things have to change now. And you can do it, in a civil, organized way. But that if you want to affect change and make things truly better and equal, it has to happen. It has to happen now. It has to get started now.
Yes. He taught us that justice delayed is justice denied.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The other thing that I think I love that he taught, and he borrowed this from Gandhi, but Gandhi borrowed it from Jesus, that that idea that nonviolence is always the way to peace, because he said you can't fight hate with more hate. Only love can drive out hate.
Right.
Just like you don't make the darkness of midnight go away by adding darkness to it. Only sunrise can do that. So I find that so powerful. But the thing that was the centerpiece of his work was those who are oppressed must live with such integrity and virtue that their oppressors feel embarrassed to be hurting such just people. When you're beating someone who refuses to fight back, even though they've got the strength, but they refuse because their principles won't allow it. He says we shame our oppressors with our beauty and our love. And I'm just so captivated by that, because I think for a lot of people, just to exist as a person from a minority group in this culture, in this climate, is so dignified. Just to survive, and live and be productive and generative in a society where you're not always appreciated. It's so. What is your dream when you think about what you want 2030 to be like? What is your dream for our country now?
2030? The year 2030?
Should we be thinking further out? Or do you want to think closer?
I think I want to think closer.
Good.
Yeah, 2030. That's a ways away. Well, that's 10 years. Yeah, that's 10 years down the line. But yeah, let's get it closer. I would say that I would want more calm and peace in our nation. And start to a real active addressing of, some of the systemic problems in our society. Coronavirus is going to come and it's going to go, and those things are still going to be there, and we have to work to eradicate them. But I just hope we can get some sense of peace and calm right here in our country. I've always been proud to be American. But lately, before George Floyd's death, I've questioned that. I've questioned that. I can't imagine how other people and countries see us and what they think. It's just a travesty. And I hope we can realize the peace and dignity that our country is accustomed to having very soon. I hope that comes back very soon.
Well said. Well said. We're used to being looked up to by other nations, and it is humiliating and embarrassing to be seen as questionable by other nations for reasons that we can't refute.
Right.
Yeah. This has been so helpful, Joan, so helpful. I just have a few final questions that I'd like to ask you, because I've asked everyone that we've been chatting with in this series about these questions, because they seem like big questions. A lot of them have to do with coronavirus particularly, but obviously all of the struggles with racial injustice and Black Lives Matter dovetail here too. The first question is, there's many people who say that everything happens for a reason. People who are very spiritually attuned are prone to say that, but also, other folks as well. What do you think? Does everything happen for a reason, or do things just happen?
I think things happen. And we are left to react to it, however that reaction is. And I was trying to think of an example when I was thinking about that question. Oftentimes, I think, say, when a person gets sick, or terminally sick, and you say, everything happens for a reason. And I was thinking of when my dad got sick, and I'm saying, did my dad get sick for a reason? Like, what was the reason? I would much have preferred he not have gotten sick and he was still here now. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think things happen, and then our test is how do you navigate that? How do you execute whatever you're going to do in light of what has happened? That's the best I can come up with for that.
I think that's great. All of us scratch our head over it. Won't it be great when we're the other side of the veil and in heaven, and we'll say, "Oh, now I get it." Now I get it. One of the reasons we started having these chats in the first place is that coronavirus is pushing all of us to the brink of our endurance. You described it so well when you said it's exhausted all of us. And I imagine that when I think of some of those people who are still living from the civil rights era, they're exhausted by the endurance it's taking to see the dream of Dr. King realized. What do you think? You've endured many things. What do you think is the key to practicing the virtue of endurance? What's the key to enduring?
Well, let me say two things. I'll tell you the key, but let me just make something clear, because I thought about this. And, you know, when I think of enduring, you know, I think of, say, a soldier, you know, a veteran who, you know, fought in World War II and made it home, and, you know, he still lives with losing, you know, fellow soldiers, and, you know, coming back to America and living, or say a Vietnam vet, you know, having to endure that and then come home to a country that wasn't so welcoming, and having to endure that. I don't feel like I've, you know, had a struggle. I don't feel like I've, you know, endured anything, you know, so tumultuous in my life. And that goes back to, I think, my childhood. You know, my parents gave me a great life, and, you know, life has been great for me. I mean, probably the most I've endured is, you know, the loss of family members, and most significantly, the loss of my father.
Yes. Yes.
But having said that, the key to enduring the loss of my father is something that I do that with something that my father gave me. And my father gave me an unshakable confidence. And that has allowed me to do many things in my life, just from, you know, graduating from high school, going to college, coming home, you know, starting my career, you know, getting married, and just living my life. And I think for me, the key to endurance is knowing that you'll get through it. You know, I mean, this coronavirus thing, yeah, it's bad. It can kill. It doesn't have, you know, it doesn't mean if you get it, you're going to die. But if you do what's been said, if you follow what we've been told, you stay in the house, you keep your distance, you only go to point A and get back, then we'll come out on the other side. You know, if you're flitting around, you're not wearing your mask, you're talking to everybody, you're hugging people, you might even be kissing people, you know, well then, you're not doing what you're supposed to do.
Yeah.
But for me, endurance comes from confidence. You know, and I live, you know, I live with that. You know, I live in my father's, you know, I live with his memory, and I know that that's what he gave me. You know, I know that's what he gave me. So,
wow, you endure by practicing one of the things that you miss so much about him, which is an amazing paradox, isn't it?
He's right.
Ooh.
Yep.
To practice it makes you miss him all the more, but it's what allows you to survive missing him.
I wish he could see me now, but you know. Yep, life is still good.
Amen. Oh, what a reunion that'll be. And of course, I came to your parish after he had passed, so I can't wait to meet him. He's a legend in our community, and I can't wait. I can't wait.
I hope he's everything you thought he was.
That I can't wait to meet him, and I can't wait to meet your grandmother Jenny. I've heard great things about her too. Oh. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. That's beautiful, and I hear it. I hear it and I feel it inside. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. The last question is about, you said 2030 feels too far off, and I agree. Let's talk about when we get beyond coronavirus, which we hope is we know it'll be a haul, but we're making our way through one day at a time. What are your best hopes for us after coronavirus? What do you think this time might teach us that could make us better, more noble, more resilient people?
Well, it kind of goes back to something I had said in the beginning. I don't remember what question it was, but we can't return to normalcy as we knew it.
Yeah.
We can't do that. We have to let go of, the complacency that I think, might be an attribute of us as Americans, but there has to be some changes. I mean, I think some things, good things that have come out of this, you learn to live with less, you slow down, you realize that, you can be with your family and have fun and, spend some time together that you don't normally get to do, day to day when we're, ripping and running, all over the place.
Yes.
But as a country, we have to, knuckle down and address, that's going to be sort of the, the fruit of this whole thing, besides the vaccine, what this has spawned is a whole new, not a new, but a whole movement, perhaps.
Yes.
Well, what came out of the coronavirus? Oh, the new civil rights movement.
Yes.
Yeah, we got the vaccine, but we also got a new civil rights movement.
Yes.
And, so, hey, does everything happen for a reason? Well, maybe that's why coronavirus happened. As unfortunate as it was for George Floyd to lose his life, if there's a good thing about this, if his death is not in vain, then perhaps that's what has happened. We've got a new civil rights movement.
I love that, and that does it. I've heard one of our earlier guests on this podcast was saying, I don't think everything in life happens for a reason, but I believe it happens for a meaning. And if we can pull the meaning of human dignity, no matter your race, out of this, whoa.
That's right.
Whoa. Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful.
Right. And I want to go back to when I was telling you about the library on Netflix.
Yes.
I think a misconception that many people have about Black people is that we know everything that's happened to Black people. And I don't.
Right.
That's why I'm watching all these movies. I want to knock them down and know what our story is, because I don't know everything.
Sure.
Nor does, my mother's 85 years old. She doesn't know everything.
Sure.
There's scholars and there's historians who, you might say they do. And those are the people I look to. But I don't know everything. I don't know everything that's happened to every Black person. I don't know everything about civil rights. Do I know some of the key points? Do I know, the catalysts that set the whole movement in motion? Yes. Because that's what we all know.
Yeah.
That's what we all know. And it's up to us to look deeper and to find those things out. But every Black person doesn't know everything that happens to Black people.
Amen.
And that misconception has to go away. Has to go away too.
We're all doing our homework. We're all doing our homework, and because we all now recognize in a new way, bystanders no more. Mm-hmm. We're all in it. We're all in it.
And, another thing too is, some people will say, people of other races will say, well, if they see Black people or, they'll say, oh, well, our other Black friends don't act like that. And it's like, well, how are they supposed to act? Or how are they supposed to talk? Or, you know what I mean? So that's that whole, misconception, I think about, the Jeffersons and, Like, Archie Bunker and all of that. Every black person doesn't act like George Jefferson. You know what I mean?
Right.
Every black person doesn't, and every white person isn't like Archie Bunker.
Right.
So.
It's so true. It's so true. Well, I feel very inspired and newly hopeful after chatting with you. So I thank you so much for this. And I just invite those listeners that are here, just take a second and just ponder, is there something from this conversation that spoke directly to your heart? Did you find yourself thinking of a situation that maybe you need to revisit in your memory, or maybe even in a conversation with someone? Is there something that maybe you understood in a new way? Is there a way that if you disagreed with anything that you heard today, that you can ask yourself a little bit about why you might have disagreed, or if it made you uncomfortable, if you're leaving with more questions than you came, that might not be a bad thing. Is there any place you'd like to bring those questions to next? Joan, we thank you so much for your time. Thank you for this. And let's hope that our conversation moves the dialogue just a tiny bit, even if it's just a tiny bit for those of us that are listening, so that we start, asking new questions and trying new things. And I thank you from the bottom of my heart for your time today. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. It's been my pleasure.
Thank you. God bless all of you.